Good morning. Does my shirt show up as kind of psychedelic or op art on your screen?
Good morning. Lloyd, can you hear me?
I hear you. Good morning.
Perfect. Thank you.
Waiting for Whitney. All right, sent it to
Good morning.
There, Whitney. Good
Sorry,
morning,
I was
Whitney.
using the Zoom link and that must not be the right one.
I did the same thing. Went in the
Good
wrong meeting.
morning.
Morning.
It's 10:03. I think we're just gonna get started. I don't know if anybody else who's, seemed like most of the evaluators were with us last week. Can't quite, recall it, but we'll record this and anybody who joins later, will have the full recording. So, Melissa, are we recording currently or you're just getting ready to start?
It is recording.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. Lloyd Schmeidler with the Community Development Department. Thanks for participating in this Housing First evaluation process. We're happy to have with us Whitney Patterson, who is our technical assistance consultant employed by Apt Associates. She's going to lead the first portion of the training, and then I'm going to do an orientation to the actual evaluation instrument that we'll be using for this process. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Whitney. She'll share her screen and we'll get this started. Welcome, everyone.
Thanks, Lloyd. And it's nice to be with you all this morning. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Actually, let me try that one more time to make sure we're getting the audio. Okay. So like Lloyd said, I'm Whitney Patterson. I work for a firm called Apt Associates, and I've been with Apt for about 10 years. And my job, which I really love, is getting to work with communities like yours as you're thinking about how to improve your homelessness system, how to really make the best use of the resources that you have. So I have been assigned to work with Durham for the last 4 years now, and I have kind of an ongoing contract with HUD to support your work, which I really love doing. And before that, I worked for Houston's Continuum of Care. So I've been on the staff side in a similar role as Lloyd in the past. So for my piece of the things of the presentation this morning, I wanted to go through an kind of a high level overview of what Housing First is. I think it's a term that most people who work within the homelessness system have some familiarity with, but I think it can mean different things to different people, and just want to level set and make sure that everyone's kind of starting from the same place in terms of expectations and what to look for as you're engaging in this evaluation work that you're doing. So overview of what Housing First is, and then try to make it a little more tangible and think about what it actually looks like in practice as housing and service programs are operating. So when we talk about Housing First, we think of it as not a certain type of housing, not a model in and of itself, but it's really a philosophy or an approach that we can use and embed in any type of shelter, service provision, housing program. So when we talk about Housing First, it's not just, oh, something for the housing providers to worry about, but really the responsibility of your entire homelessness system, so that you can provide immediate access to housing and then offer the supportive services that people might need to foster long-term housing stability and prevent a return to homelessness. And the whole approach is intended to remove unnecessary barriers and assume that supportive services are more effective in addressing needs when the individual or family is housed. So that when we're able to take away the stress of experiencing homelessness in and of itself, take that out of the equation, people are really set up to have more success as they're working toward other goals that they've developed. So I'm going to start before we jump into the content with a short video that kind of grounds us and why we're talking about housing first and looking at the experience of someone who has experienced homelessness. This is from Houston, where I worked, and has been in housing for quite a while and talks through what that looks like from his perspective as a client. And please let me know if the audio or video is not working as we're doing this.
It was a struggle, but I never gave up hope.
John Nichols is a military vet who spent 10 years of his life on the hot streets of Houston.
In my situation, I'm a widow and I had lost my wife. And I went into a depression, deep depression. This is my wife, just deceased.
Nichols spent most of those years living in an abandoned house. His struggles took a toll.
Alcohol and marijuana, pills. Amen.
But Nichols got assistance through the community's program to help homeless people transition from the streets to permanent housing.
The services are out there if you want them.
For the past 7 years, Nichols has been living at this apartment in Northwest Houston.
It's a blessing.
It's not congregate housing where homeless people are grouped together. It's an apartment where he feels at home.
I have a roof over my head. As you all can see, it's a nice apartment.
So we're going to talk through some of the principles of what makes this type of housing possible and what really leads to success as people are engaged and supported into getting housed and having that stability long term. So the first principle that we believe in and that we really strive to implement in a housing first system is that everyone is housing ready. And that means housing first is really focused on rapidly connecting the person or the family who's experiencing homelessness to a permanent home. And we do so without preconditions. So we don't say, oh, first you need to get a job or you need to have a certain amount of income before we set you up in housing. You need to get sober. You need to work on some of these barriers. It's really saying, homelessness in and of itself makes these things really hard to achieve. It's that much of a more challenge to get employed, to get income going, to focus on health and safety needs when you're sleeping outside or in other precarious situations. And so really saying, let's get people safely and stably housed and then work with them to identify what kinds of support they would like to have. It also really serves as a stable platform from which people can pursue those personal goals and improve their quality of life. And I think one misconception that we sometimes hear is people say, well, housing first doesn't work because just giving someone housing doesn't resolve the problem. And it's really important to keep in mind that when we talk about housing first, we're not talking about housing only. So it's not saying, oh, we're just going to give someone a voucher and move them in and say good luck. It's really providing tailored services and supports that are needed to help the person find stability and to address those long-term needs. And that service package, can vary quite a bit depending on what the person's needs are. And as I'm going, feel free to put any questions in the chat, and Lloyd will help me pause if there's anything that we need to talk through together. Another principle of Housing First is that we implement low barriers to housing. So going along with that first concept of having no preconditions for housing, it also means that we're proactively trying to overcome some of those barriers that people might have to get market rate or permanent housing in the community. So we screen in the most vulnerable people. We look at removing requirements and preconditions or notions of worthiness or who's likely to succeed. So our job in the homelessness system and the really skilled providers that you're working with is to find solutions to those barriers instead of viewing them as dead ends. We also look at incorporating principles of equity. We know that people who experience homelessness are disproportionately impacted by the criminal justice system, and also by racism and other forms of oppression. And so it's really important that our homelessness system provides really equitable solutions to homelessness and doesn't further perpetuate those disparities we see that cause people to become homeless in the first place. And that looks like having staff who are very culturally competent and really have a good grasp on the needs that people might be experiencing, as well as the strengths that people experience, and able to really build connections and understand what people are going through. And it also means that our services are very trauma informed and that we really seek to provide safety and healthy supports for people. Another piece of the Housing First approach is that we really tailor the services that people have access to so that they're necessary for what that individual person is interested in and what they need in order to sustain and keep people in housing. And it's this really, I think, when done well, like a very sophisticated partnership that the staff are able to develop, because I think it takes a lot of finesse and ability to partner with people instead of telling people you need to do XYZ. It's really, how do we walk alongside a person to help identify those goals and help motivate a person and help them feel supported as they're working toward their goals. It also means that these services are voluntary. So we're not saying, okay, you need to participate in certain classes, you need to have this goal that we're telling you to have. Instead of having blanket requirements, we're really looking at what does the individual person need and what are they going to find important. So, in thinking about those principles, you know, in an ideal housing program and an ideal system, how we would implement those things, it's also important to look at the bigger picture in the community. So, you can have a really great individual service provider that's operating their program and has implemented it. But if it's done in isolation or in a silo where those larger systemic needs are not being addressed across the entire homelessness system, it's really hard you know, to achieve the outcomes that you're hoping to and getting people very quickly and stably housed. So as you're looking at your entire system, so the combination of funders, service providers, leaders in your system who are developing policies, funding programs, implementing those programs, these are some of the key things we've seen that really lead to success in communities and making a shift toward a more housing first system. One idea is that you're uncoupling service provision from leases or tenancy. So that means if you have a client who, might be very hesitant to engage with services, might not be interested in receiving a lot of services, that's not the thing that's their housing is contingent upon. So separating the idea of lease violations from service compliance is really critical. We also need to look at the rules that are across the entire system. So those can include both written and unwritten rules. A lot of times, and I think this will come up a lot in the work that you're doing for evaluating these systems, is something will be documented a certain way in a policies and procedures, or maybe is not even referenced. And then, staff or people over time have interpreted things in a certain way, and the way things that are the way that it impacts how services are provided or how expectations are communicated to clients can be different than what the policies or the standards have identified as an approach. And so really looking at, closely assessing programs to see, are these really operating in the way that we intended, and are people being, is there clear communication with clients about expectations and people's rights within the programs? Another really key concept is that we do not make alcohol or drug use without other lease violations a basis for exclusion or eviction. So this is kind of coupled with that first goal of separating service provision from leases or tenancy. It's to say, if someone is not violating a lease as a result of substance use, the substance use in and of itself is not a reason that someone should be exited from the program. So you can be a great tenant and really, do what you need to do to keep your housing and still engage in substance use. That alone is not something that should determine whether or not someone can stay in housing. And I will pause here. I see Jeffrey, you're raising your hand.
Just for a little bit of clarification, if it is in your lease that you can't use substances on the premises, and that is found to be a violation of the lease, we're not advocating for that to change if it's a lease violation, are we? Or are we? Because in North Carolina, there is an addendum to many places that have a lease that say that you can't use substances on the premises.
So I think that's a really helpful thing to think about. One is that people should be given leases that any other tenant in the community would have. So I've had leases as a renter that say, I'm not allowed to smoke indoors, or I am not, allowed to use illegal substances. I've never had a lease that says I can't drink alcohol, or I've lived in states where marijuana is legal. And so, my landlord might say you can't smoke inside, but it doesn't say like I, as an adult, cannot engage in things that are legal. So that's one thing, to look at is the lease kind of a standard lease that any other person in the community would have? And then I think for that second part of, that's the landlord's responsibility then. So if the person has been using illegal substances in their home, it's not the service provider's job to go notify the landlord and say, hey, your tenant's been, using drugs in their house. If the landlord finds out through whatever way they would typically find that out, that's their prerogative to enforce as they would normally with any other tenant. But I think that gets to a lot of the harm reduction practices that I've seen service providers really help their clients think through. So, I think that's a conversation to have with the client is, hey, your lease says you can't use illegal substances in your home. We've talked about in the past that you've, like sometimes, chosen to use this substance. So, right. So like having that rapport with the client first, where you can openly talk about substance use that the person might be engaging with, and then thinking about what can that look like in a way that feels as safe as possible and is not setting them up for being evicted. So really, thinking through what engaging in substance use that the person might be having would look like, and also being really clear that, if this is something you're doing in your home, it is going to make it hard for you to, to maintain this lease if you're doing it in a way that your landlord is going to be aware of.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. And I think that's where, like goes back to that first point too, of really uncoupling the service provision from the lease or tenancy. So if your case manager is not also your landlord, it really separates those roles where, it's not your case manager's job to enforce those. It's more to educate and support and maintaining the lease.
Right, and I just wanted that clarification because we're talking about our system and what we're doing as case managers and what we're advising our case managers to do, but we're not advocating to get a landlord to modify a lease for our tenants if it's not going to be the same for the other tenants. If all tenants get a lease that say you can't do substances on the premises, then we're not advocating to change that. We're just making sure that it's not being applied to our program participants when it's not being applied to anyone else.
Right. Yeah. I've never had a landlord go into my kitchen and look to see if I have wine in my fridge, or, like those are the kinds of things that you would expect the tenant to be treated just like any other tenant in the community.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up, Jeffrey. I appreciate it. So that the next point on this slide is talking about system-wide support for lowering barriers to program entry across the system. So a lot of the times when we talk about homelessness systems specifically, we're talking about shelters, housing programs, case management that is exclusively for people who have experienced homelessness. But we know that our clients really benefit from and engage in services across the community that are not specific to the homelessness system. And I think that goes back to what does it look like to have harm reduction and low barrier practices? We know that when people are interested in things like substance use treatment, sometimes it can be really challenging to get support. And that oftentimes there are really long lengths of wait between, when the person expresses interest in like going into a treatment program and when a bed would be opened up, or even knowing how to navigate some of those options or pay for them. And so I think that goes to what are we advocating for across the community and across the system is really looking at what are the challenges our clients might experience in engaging in those mainstream services, and how are we working with those other partners to make that pathway as smooth and accessible as possible so that people can really engage in a broad range of services that they might benefit from. And that can also look like, really simple things like, if you don't have an ID, if you don't have a home address to get papers mailed to, it can be sometimes hard to sign up for different benefits programs, to look for jobs. And so the housing in and of itself can really like help mitigate some of those challenges. Another piece of that is ensuring that leaders, managers, and staff understand and have tools to implement housing first. So an example of how that can be challenging that I've seen is in Houston when I was working there, one of the standards we identified as being really critical to being able to implement housing first was to provide support within the community to our clients. So not just saying you come to me, you come to my office and we'll meet, but really looking at what are the kinds of supports that a person would want. And a lot of times that looked like accompanying the person to appointments, to doctor's visits, all of that. And that in a community that's very sprawling, that doesn't have great public transportation, can be hard. And so when we worked with individual providers, one barrier they would often have is saying, even if you gave me money to buy a minivan or to transport clients, it's against our organization's policy to transport clients. So I think looking at what are those barriers to implementing some of the housing first practices, and how do you need to get buy-in from nonprofit boards, from executive directors, from leaders to help overcome some of those policies that might make it hard to implement. And then this last part is where you all really come in at this point. So you can have great standards, you can have great policies written, you can have great providers, but you need to have a way to monitor and evaluate implementation of these standards so that you can really look at what's working well in your community and where the areas that maybe certain providers need extra support or need some training or extra attention around implementing fully the expectations. So I think this monitoring and evaluation piece, I think sometimes people think, oh, that's kind of, like if you have a limited capacity or, don't have all the time in the world, it can kind of be put on the back burner. But I think it's really critical to ensuring that people really have a great understanding of how these programs are being implemented and where the gaps are, and also being able to identify things that are working really well that you do want to share as best practices in your community. I'm going to share another short video now. This one is, if I can exit out of here. This one is from a program in New York City called Pathways to Housing. They are a nonprofit that really, I think, highlighted a lot of what we now know as standard practice in housing first provision. So a lot of those principles that we talked through about, helping eliminate barriers, having really like low barrier entry into housing, Pathways to Housing was one of the first providers in the country to really like buy into that and think of, how to provide support in this way. I think some of the monitoring that you're doing is based on criteria that they've established. And so this is a video that shows what their service provision looks like and kind of like walks you through what this might look like in a provider's program. So I'm just going to share the first 5 minutes of this, but you're welcome to go through and watch the full video on your own later.
Housing First has two program requirements. One is that the person has to pay 30% of their income towards their rent. And because it's a program that has both treatment and housing as their component, the person must agree to having us visit once a week. Visit.
If you start to run the numbers and you see how much time you have face-to-face contact with individuals, it's not that much. It's really not that much. How many people on your caseload? 60, 80, 100? You better have a good idea of what it is that you're trying to accomplish.
The home visit is like really the heart and kind of soul of the work we do, because I think that's ultimately where you want the change to happen, in their environment. And so it's important to kind of support them and assist them in their environment.
Now, it's not a visit that's a treatment visit, and I think this is an important distinction. It's a visit much in the way that you would visit a relative.
Hey, James. Good. How you doing? Good. Good to see you.
Like a how you doing visit, and sort of checking to make sure that they're okay in the apartment.
We do home visits for a couple reasons.
It's the bedroom.
Ultimately, we are the housing provider. Things break in the apartment, not because of what the consumer did, but when you're renting an apartment, things break. Bedroom looks great.
Thank you.
It's important to get on that, to keep landlords accountable to their responsibility, but also keeping us accountable to what we need to do.
It's a visit like other home visits of care and concern.
Hey James, you wanna talk at the couch? You get a more candid picture of how they're doing in their apartment, how they're doing psychiatrically, whether there's any issues coming up. I actually saw you yesterday. It was right up here. It was in Germantown, Shelton, and you were and I almost like beeped and like jumped out, but I was like, oh, I actually get going. But okay, yeah. I was like, oh, I'll see you tomorrow.
Okay.
So you get around a lot on your bike?
Yeah, a little amount, yeah, around the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You ever bike into the city or anything like that, or is that too far?
No, well, it's not too far, but I bike because I wait for a little more comeback. Now I'm feeling a little more comeback.
What's that mean?
Well, that just meant the body's feeling very normal, like, so that's what saved me. I could not exercise before, so I used the bike to exercise. And you build some little amount of muscle coming back up in the legs real slow.
I did want to focus in on his health because that has been kind of a window into engaging him.
It's a program, right? It's not a housing authority where a person gets an apartment and they go. It's a program.
It's not like, hey buddy, how you doing? Good? You good? How's it going? Good? Take your meds, yeah? Everything all right? Good? See you tomorrow. Good? Right? And you come back to your team, how's buddy doing? Good. That's not what we're doing here, guys. It's a targeted intervention.
How have things been going with Dr. Laura?
Well, things been going great with Dr. Laura, yeah.
Does taking the medications they have you on affect your body?
This affects my body as sweat out.
So is that uncomfortable for you?
Yeah, it's uncomfortable. But
have you told her about that?
No, I didn't tell her about that yet, because
some of the assessments that are going on kind of blend into just hanging out.
This might be the final blood test.
You get certain cues, like if the person is typically talkative and they're kind of reserved, and that might be a cue if something is going on. If they're usually well groomed and they have a less clean look, and maybe things are kind of deteriorating psychiatrically. You get clues into what's really going on in their apartment. And in a practical side, we can support them the best way we can. A lot of medications have different side effects. If they can adjust it or change in any way and still get the positive effects of it,
right.
But and you might not feel as uncomfortable as you are now,
Right.
that would be good.
That would be good, yeah.
So let Dr. Laura know kind of how you're feeling on the medication.
Right.
Um, that'd be good.
Yeah.
The artfulness of the visit is that you're trying to engage people in services that they haven't actually asked for. They've only asked for housing often, and sometimes they won't ask for much more than that, but to sort of keep opening the door.
The birthday celebration is today.
Right.
So you're welcome to come down. We'll give you a ride.
Okay.
If you want to. We probably would leave Germantown 11:30. What are you thinking?
Yeah, that's cool.
That's cool? You gonna do it?
That's cool.
One thing I wanted to remind you about, because John in the housing department we've been getting electric bills for folks.
Right, yeah.
And people have a certain amount of utility allowance.
Yeah, they told me
But
that.
once you go over,
Yeah.
it'd be on you to.
Yeah.
And so I see that. So I don't want you to go over.
Right.
So you have to, so you don't have to pay.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um,
I might be a little over or not. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe making the transition to living full-time independently is a tough transition. There's a new kind of learning curve they're going through.
This is a cheap air conditioner, and the little amount of air that comes out of here, I was trying to get it to just come over.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Part of our responsibility as the treatment team, as the ACT team, is to help them transition that the best way they can. Helping them with the practical things like laundry or groceries or going to this appointment or that appointment. Because if they feel like they're doing it on their own, it can be too daunting. That's awesome.
Exactly.
Cool.
So I'm just curious, as we watch that, if anyone has any initial reactions, anything that you picked up on in that video about topics that the tenant and the case manager were talking through, or anything that felt related to the housing first approach.
Thanks, Whitney. I mean, I think that the idea of a check-in and to really work with the client on, the basic skills of of living in an apartment, managing one's budget, managing medications if people are on medications, checking in with their primary physician perhaps regularly to and to support them in their efforts to regain physical health perhaps, or kind of just I like that idea that I think Dr. Severas mentioned in a presentation in the video around, kind of like a visit in the same way you might visit, an aunt or an uncle or somebody in the family to just kind of check in, say, how you doing? What's going on? And then reviewing that. So I like that. Thanks for putting the link in the chat as well. Welcome, Danielle. Glad you could join us.
Jeffrey, did you have something to share?
I just really liked it. It was very conversational. It was client-centered. It was information that you could tell they had already talked about. The health issues, the issues with his doctor, talking about the light bill. He didn't have a clipboard or anything with him, so he wasn't physically taking notes in front of the client. Told him that he had saw him the day before, which was putting the client at ease, showing there was a relationship. I thought it was a very, very, very good case manager visit, and you could tell that the tenant was at ease as well. While they were walking around looking, he still remained engaged, talking to him the entire time to maintain eye contact with him. He didn't laud over him. They were seated, and they were both seated in equal positions, not in a position of authority. That he wasn't in a chair looking at him across from him. So I thought it was just very well conducted.
I think those are all really great things to highlight. And I think one thing that stood out to me is I've seen some programs where it can feel very scripted, or like, oh, we need to address XYZ, and it's kind of like going through a checklist. And I think to your point, and Lloyd's, it felt very conversational and natural, right? And I think when it feels more like that supportive partnership, people are more willing to engage and open up and share. And I think also, like, he did a good job of being very direct about some of the questions he was asking. So it wasn't just like, hey, tell me when you need help with something. It was checking in on really specific things, right? Like, how are your side effects from your medication? How are, these things, so that like in that example, he hadn't shared with his doctor that he was feeling uncomfortable. So I think it's also helping empower clients so that they feel like it's okay to advocate for yourself, or like, there are other options if this thing isn't working out for you, so that people really feel equipped to navigate some of the things that they're going through. Anything else that anyone wants to highlight or talk through? Feel free to stop me if anything comes up, but I'm going to return back to the slides now. So we're going to now shift to talking about what do these principles look like in practice. And I think the video was really helpful to make it feel a little concrete and really get an insight into what this kind of service provision can look like. So one idea that we talked about in the principles is that people experiencing homelessness are offered permanent housing without programmatic preconditions. So um, they don't have to demonstrate a commitment to sobriety. It's really meeting the person where they are and knowing that things like substance use are really a spectrum, and that, it's not the provider's place to tell the person you need to be adhering to a certain, level of sobriety or engaging in certain meetings or treatment programs. It's really helping the person identify what their own goals are and what kinds of support they want, and getting them well positioned with those supports. It also doesn't look like completing behavioral health treatment or financial literacy classes or any other kind of programmatic or classes that a person would need to um, be required to do. It also does not include agreeing to comply with a treatment regimen or service plan upon entry to the program. So it's really, in that video we watched, they did talk about, the person does need to agree to meet with us with some level of frequency. So engaging with a case manager is a requirement of all of the programs we're talking about. But what that engagement looks like and what is being offered is really up to the client to figure out what they want, and really up to the provider to make those services accessible. So things like making them in-home visits, keeping in contact through text or email in between, and really making them appealing. So listening to the client about what they want and what's important to them, and not forcing things upon the person. What does low barrier admission policy look like in practice? So I've visited providers who, when I walk through their intake or assessment process with them, I get really overwhelmed by the amount of paperwork that's needed, or maybe how rigid the initial meeting structure is, having to come in at certain times or have certain appointments in place. And so one thing that's really critical in these programs is trying to screen in applicants and really providing a lot of support as people are getting through the admissions phase in and of itself. So I think sometimes people who've attempted to exit homelessness have identified so many barriers to getting into programs that they will assume that they're not eligible or won't follow through with things because they've been turned down so many times. So one thing that can be really helpful for providers to do is proactively communicate to clients things like, hey, to be in this housing program, it's okay if you don't have income to start with. We will help you with that. It's okay if you've had a hard time getting landlords to approve you for leases in the past. We've had really great success with getting people with barriers into housing, and we can provide support to find landlords who will work with you. So really proactively helping the person know that they will qualify for your program, even if you have some, even if they've had, negative experiences in the past, and that we're also helping people through those steps. So rather than saying, hey, come back when you have all this, documentation in place, come back when you have your ID, it's really providing the staff support up front so that those things are not what's getting in the way of the person getting housed. That we're able to provide support and like getting through those hoops instead of making the person do it on their own. Related to that is how lengthy it can sometimes be for a person to get housed. I think even under the best, circumstances and even with a lot of support, it can easily take, 1 to 3 months to get someone from the time of intake into an apartment. And so what are we doing within programs to really mitigate how long the approval process can take and really helping people find housing units that will accept them as tenants. So that can look like, driving people around to look at units, going with them to view units. It can look like, having really intensive landlord engagement practices where you're proactively finding landlords who will help, make the process as easily as possible so that we're really reducing the wait times and keeping people actively engaged during that first phase of the process. What do voluntary services look like in practice? So when services are voluntary, that doesn't mean that they don't exist. It means that it's up to the person to decide if and when they engage in those services. So it's up to the service providers to really proactively offer them, make them easy to engage with, really persistently engage the tenants, and use skills like motivational interviewing training to help kind of sell the services or sell the support to the person in a way that it's really, their choice and really up to them to decide if it's something that they're ready or interested in engaging in. It also looks like really making it clear to the tenant that their housing is not contingent upon engaging in those services. I've seen sometimes when this is not clearly communicated, clients walking away from their housing, right? So they're so afraid of getting evicted or so afraid of getting kicked out of a program that if they feel like they've quote unquote messed up or not, followed through with something, they might disappear from the housing program. And so it's really important to make this very clear. Again, like what are those written and unwritten rules in a program? How are we really proactively communicating to a client that, they have a right to the housing? Engaging in these services is not required. It's not going to get them kicked out of housing if they don't follow through with certain things. It also means having a lot of skill in harm reduction techniques that can help mitigate the harms of drug or alcohol use or other risky behaviors through non-judgmental communication. So, telling the person, hey, that's against the law, don't do it, really shuts down that relationship. Talking really openly and honestly about a person's substance use and how to do it or how to engage in the safest and least risky way is really a critical skill that case managers need to have and have a lot of comfort with because it's hard for people to open up when the staff themselves maybe are not comfortable or don't feel like they have enough education or support to engage in those conversations. And then I mentioned motivational interviewing. If this is a term that might be unfamiliar if you haven't been part of a program that's providing services, but it's really kind of a conversational guide that people can use with it was initially developed around substance use treatment, but it can really be a good method for helping people in general identify goals and change that they might be interested in making and providing support in a way that doesn't feel like you're forcing decisions upon a person. It's really helping guide them through their own thought process and really identifying like what the person is interested in and what supports might be needed to get there. And then we talked some about, what does it look like to separate the role of the landlord from the role of the service provider? And part of that, as you're providing tenant support, goes both ways, right? So the tenant has expectations that they should be living up to comply with the lease, but the landlord also has things that they need to be following through with. And so part of the work of the program is helping people understand what their rights and responsibilities as tenants are so that they are educated about what does their lease say that they need to follow through with. Does it have requirements around guest visiting? Does it have requirements around being noisy or using certain substances, paying your rent on time, all of those things so that the person really has confidence in what they need to do to be a good tenant. It also means that when people need legal assistance to navigate certain challenges, they're given access to those resources and that they're encouraged to exercise their full rights and responsibilities as tenants so that, if there are repairs needed to the unit, if there are ways that maybe they're being mistreated as a tenant or maybe having trouble with neighbors, they know how to navigate those options and feel supported in, the rights that they have as tenants to enforce those responsibilities that the landlords have. And then the last piece of this is, if tenancy is not contingent on supportive services, it does take quite a bit of skills to help prevent lease violations. So really looking at what challenges has the person had in the past with maintaining a unit, and how can we get ahead of some of those challenges. So like in the video that we watched, the case manager was talking about utility allowances. So the provider is able to pay a certain amount a month, toward the utilities. But if the tenant's utility use goes over that amount, they're responsible for the balance of it. If someone's not familiar with that responsibility or not keeping tabs on it, you can easily get in the situation where maybe the tenant has built up some past due bills or hasn't followed through with their portion of the rent and is getting at risk of eviction. So it means, not waiting until those things are a problem to address them, but really proactively checking in, ensuring that people are holding up their end of the lease deal and providing supports and flexibility when they need support around paying things like that. That's it for my part. If anyone has questions, I'm happy to stay on, but I know Lloyd also has some pieces to get to around the monitoring itself.
Thanks so much, Whitney. Really appreciate your guidance and this presentation today. I did want to ask a follow-up question, and that is recognition that we're going to be evaluating some rapid rehousing projects as well as permanent supportive housing projects for their Housing First implementation. And I wondered if you had any thoughts about any significant differences in terms of how rapid rehousing projects or permanent supportive housing projects would implement Housing First.
Yeah, that's a great point. And so going back to the idea that every provider that's part of your homelessness system, whether it's emergency shelter services or any form of housing, can really implement Housing First approaches. And it might look different in different types of programs. So, a permanent supportive housing program is really intended to assist people who have the most challenges with maintaining housing in the community. So usually this is people who have experienced chronic homelessness, meaning they've been homeless for many years at a time, and by definition have some kind of disability that makes it really challenging to maintain housing independently. And so when we're looking at the array of services needed and how to tailor that approach for people in permanent supportive housing, the services are often much more intensive that are needed and long term. So, if someone needs permanent supportive housing for the rest of their lives, that's what it's there for. That's the permanent piece of it. So it's really this like potentially lifelong relationship that the person has with the service and housing provider. And the person likely has much more intensive needs around some form of disability, which in our world often is related to substance use or mental health needs, but not exclusively. So I think that's part of it, is knowing that people in permanent supportive housing have the most intensive needs. How are you able to connect them with that level of care that's needed? What we often see in permanent supportive housing programs is that it includes some kind of like medical or mental health treatment as part of the service package available within the program, and that the goals might be different, right? So while we hope that everyone can increase their income, it also might mean it takes longer or looks different for people in permanent supportive housing to attain income. It might be a lot more people getting Social Security disability income. It might be people in supported employment programs and things like that. Rapid rehousing, by definition, is a time-limited support. So it can go up to at most 2 years of housing subsidies and supportive services. So it's intended to be used for people who, after that initial 2-year period, can maintain housing independently. That might include use of something like a housing choice voucher or some kind of long-term option for subsidized housing. But the idea is that they have the skills to maintain that tenancy independently, right? So they don't need a case manager for the rest of their lives checking in, making sure they're able to follow through with their commitments as a tenant. So access to supportive services is still really critical for tenants. And again, like people in all situations have needs for a variety of services. But usually in rapid rehousing, the goals are much more focused on how do we get you set up for success so that when you exit this program, you have enough income going, your kids are connected with childcare, really focused on what does it look like to exit this program successfully, versus kind of maintaining a steady state of housing within the program. So it's still similar, right? Like it's still the client choosing the goals, the client determining what's important and providing support. We're not forcing things like certain employment programs or literacy classes on the program and on the participant. But we're still, it is a more short-term program, and so the goals are a little different.
Very good. Thank you so very much. Appreciate that. I know you have a
Oh, I think we lost Lloyd for
I
a minute.
think we lost Lloyd. He'll probably jump back in. Sorry about that. We've been having a few technical issues this morning.
I'm going to jump off for another meeting, but I know when Lloyd returns, he's going to walk you guys through the actual monitoring tool itself and the process that you'll be using.
Okay, Whitney, does anybody else have any questions for Whitney while we're here? If not, we'll say thank you and wish you a great day and talk to you soon.
Thank you. See you later.
Bye. Melissa, is there a way we can pause recording for any particular time just until Lloyd comes back? Or will we be able to edit? Oh, he's back. Never mind.
sorry about that. I don't know. My computer kicked me out for some reason.
Welcome back, Lloyd. Thank you. Whitney just left. No one else had any questions for her. So we're
All right.
ready to transition to your part.
Very good. Thank you so much. I'm going to try to share my screen and hopefully get to what I want to share. I want to share this. Why is it not letting me share that? These are great when they work. We want them to. What are you guys seeing on your screen?
Just you, Lloyd.
Just me. How boring.
Shouldn't say just you.
I don't understand why it's not giving me that as an option to share.
See if it's giving you a different tab at the top. So when you see the little share screen pop up, is it giving you Windows or a specific browser?
It is. Melba's here to help. Thank you, Melba. Here's my content. It's very strange. Usually it's here in the list, but it's only letting me share Excel stuff, even though I've got it uploaded here. And when I click here share, it says save to the cloud.
Lloyd, did you hear Melissa's note? When you hit share, what comes up?
All right, so when I hit share, when I click share, it says share content. It then says screen, window, or tab. Then there's another
Click
Microsoft
window.
whiteboard. Click on which one?
Window.
And then I get a screen. It says calendar. Select the tab to share. Window here. Nothing comes up when I click on window. When I click on the entire screen, very strange.
I think Melissa, you going over?
It's strange. Yeah, I apologize for this. I mean, usually I've got a whole list of Excel files to share, but I'm not wanting to share Excel. I want to share the MS Word
Try
document.
tab, Lloyd. When you click share, try tab. That's what happens.
Microsoft Edge tab. I've got the calendar, and and then in a gray box it says select the tab to share, and I click on that. Hey, Melissa. So here's what shows up when I want to share content.
Have the document open?
I have the document open right here.
Okay. And then go back to the meeting. All right.
Browse OneDrive.
Go back to window tab.
Go back to here.
Click window. I would just do entire screen and then click on the document to make it easy. I don't know why it's not popping up.
So when I click entire screen,
Share. And then click on the document.
can you guys see that now?
We can, thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Melissa. Sometimes in-person help is still the best. All right. Is this large enough?
It could be a little larger.
And if I can. How's that? Is that too large?
That's okay.
All right. Thank you. All right. So this is the actual evaluation tool that the that the evaluation teams will be using to evaluate our 6 project types. Those assignments have been made. I think I've communicated with them. The only difference between this tool and the actual tool you'll be using is that I have gone through the tool and added notes on each question as for potential sources where you might find, where the evaluation team may find information that would address the question. Most of the potential sources are going to be the project's policies and procedures, and then in the follow-up interviews, the evaluation team would be able to follow up and ask particular questions. All of the questions, or all of the portions of the evaluation tool generally are in the form of a question that could be asked to staff or the case managers or team leads within a particular organization. So easy enough. Ask them how does, for example, DASH determine the type of housing in which a participant will live, right? So I'm just going to quickly go through these. It's already 11:05. I think the potential sources, again, most often are going to be policies and procedures. There's some 36 questions. I think most of them have points assigned to them. Not all of them do. Some are just for background information. Number 3 only looks at interviews. I'm not sure that you would find information in the policies and procedures around how a project may assist project participants with getting furniture for a new apartment. A lot of them are potential sources, policies and procedures, and interviews. There was question 5 concerns actual information on the annual performance report, which we will be getting to the team lead ahead of the site visit. This is information that is in the annual performance report from the HMIS, or Homeless Management Information System. Table 22C answers that question, and we'll report that to you. It's actually not a question that needs to be asked in the interview with on the site visit. Question 6 again comes back to policies and procedures and interviews. Question 7 should be clearly enough within the policies and procedures and the interviews. And for many of these questions, I abbreviated policies and procedures and interviews to PP&I. So if you see PP&I as a potential source, references policies and procedures and interviews. I want to say a word about agreeing to face-to-face visits with staff. As Whitney suggested in her presentation, this is kind of a minimum requirement, but how that is implemented should be really in flexibility and in dialogue with a particular participant and the client. So how this face-to-face visits is actually accomplished could be done through virtual visits, in-person visits, and it should be an agreement. So the question really is around how does the project staff work in a flexible way with participants to arrange for ongoing case management visits. And the team could decide that to not take any points off for the way the project has people meet the responsibilities of a standard lease in addition to face-to-face visits. These other things could be things that you take points off for. Number 8, again, is policies and procedures and sample monitoring. One of the things the evaluation team could do is to ask for a copy of an occupancy agreement that the participants might have. Number 9 is going to be primarily interviews, more than policies and procedures. You will be getting the policies and procedures that the evaluation team can review ahead of a site visit. Number 10 primarily focuses on interviews. Question 11 is policies and procedures and interviews again. So you just all of these you'll be getting, so at least two documents with the evaluation tool. One is what I'm calling a clean document, and then this one will have notes under for each question that if you check on the notes I've put in, here's a longer note for question 14. Before the site visit, check the APR table 13A to be aware of the kinds of disabilities participants have. So that can, and how many participants have a substance abuse disorder. So for example, you may have encountered, particularly perhaps a rapid rehousing project that suggests that there aren't any people with substance disorders currently in the project, and so how you deal with that could be different. And I would say if you find a project that doesn't have any participants identified with substance use disorders, the project could still receive full credit, or you could decide to not include the 3 points available in this in your final scoring. And we can talk about that further on an individual basis with the team after you complete your evaluation. 15 is interviews. 16 is program descriptions. One of the things that evaluation teams can do on your site visits, well, 2 things. You can review via the organization's website to see if there's any information about the projects in their annual reports that they may have on a website. And when you actually do a site visit, you can also ask for any project description, any brochures that have descriptions of the project that they might give to prospective tenants. So we're not asking for any brochures or annual reports up front or ahead of time. The resources that will enable you to prepare for the site visits will be simply the policies and procedures. That would be the main source to a review before a site visit. But during the site visit itself, you could ask for if they have any brochures and that might provide additional information about the projects. Service survey, similarly, going to be potentially looking at brochures and how the project describes its offerings. You could also, particularly for the staff here, but it is public information, all of our COC funded projects have applied for renewal funding, and their application for COC funds for the 2023 competition is on the COC website at the Community Developments Department website, so you could access that and get a sense for how they talk about providing services to project participants. Again, PP and program descriptions and interviews can help you look at how they're supportive of their clients. Psychiatric services. This is, again, a pretty thorough overview of some of the various strategies that Housing First programs should be using. Talking about paid employment opportunities, we know that HUD in particular really wants our COC funded projects to help both rapid rehousing participants as well as permanent supportive housing participants look at ways to further increase their income, and it evaluates us on what percentage of participants in our COC funded projects are actually receiving employment income. So we're asking about that, but in preparation for that, or part of the process could be to also help participants access education resources, or as question 23 suggests, access volunteering opportunities. Sometimes, particularly when people have not been in the employment sector sometimes for many years, a step towards employment could be engaging in volunteer opportunities in their community, getting them connected perhaps to different volunteer opportunities at a local, perhaps at the local shelter, or with with another organization in the community that might be of interest to them. There's certainly no shortage of volunteer opportunities that people can engage in. 24 has interviews, schedules showing on-site health promotion and education activities. So, for example, you might go to a site visit and ask for information about this, and you might ask if they have any schedules that show upcoming health promotion or educational activities that are going to be available to participants in the next month or two, or maybe they have already a yearly calendar. So that's the kind of idea of that. Again, an organizational chart could be asked for in the on-site interview that would show that they have a paid peer specialist on staff who provides services directly to participants. And it is important to distinguish whether any peer specialists on staff are providing services to participants in the COC funded project, or if they're providing services to another program within the organization. For example, we know that our street outreach projects do have peer support specialists. They may ordinarily, I don't believe they're directly involved with our COC funded projects. So that's the idea of this file, is that it gives you some information of where you can find receive answers to these questions. Again, question 27 is one of a couple that are actually not scored, but are just for information of the evaluation team and how the program is actually structured. 28 and 29 are important questions, especially for permanent supportive housing projects. You can see that both 28 and 29 are not applicable to rapid rehousing projects, because ordinarily we're thinking that these questions, especially around psychiatric hospitalizations, are more for people who have longer term needs for the supportive services of a permanent supportive housing project. Question 29 is also not scored. something to keep in mind there. Staff ratios are a little different. We're suggesting that permanent supportive housing projects should generally have a staff ratio of 10 to 20 participants for one full-time equivalent case management staff. Rapid rehousing projects could have a higher caseload of 15 to 25 participants per case manager. Again, staff schedules can help you get in a sense for how often they're training for these various key kind of skills for project staff. Minimum number of face-to-face contacts. So there's kind of a question there. We're looking for optional, or how they manage face-to-face contacts and how they really communicate this to project participants, and how the project works with clients on face-to-face contact. So it is a goal to have face-to-face contacts, but how that's communicated and the flexibility related to that should be talked about, and the team can evaluate that as well. And then that last question is policy, what is the actual number of face-to-face contacts? Questions 36 and 37 then look more at how the staff structures itself, how it works together with other members of the team, perhaps a supervisor and other case managers on implementing the housing first approaches. So that's a quick overview, and there's final question 37 is more of a general question that might give the evaluation team additional information that they can use when they come together after the site visit to reach consensus on their final scores for the project. And then, because there are a couple questions that are scored for permanent supportive housing projects, but not for rapid rehousing projects, there are some differences. And as I suggested, there are also some opportunities for the evaluation teams to evaluate whether they want to include their particular questions, particularly around agreement about face-to-face visits. We can make some adjustments to that if the team agrees to do that. Again, I've cited here this overall approach of this tool was developed by Sam Severus with Pathways to Housing and some of his colleagues back in, I think, the 2013 and the 2013 time period. So it is a Housing First Fidelity survey that you can find online. Any questions before I stop sharing about this tool?
Question 33, Lord. I think it was question 33.
Question 33?
About the face-to-face. Can we go into that just for a little bit? Because there is I think that's the one. Because there's a high requirement for PSH, and I know that the scoring is different, but for PSH, you're expected to meet more than you would with rapid rehousing. It seems like this is rewarding more visits by for PSH than it would for rapid rehousing. And I think it's 32.
Okay, so 32 looks at, is there a policy regarding the minimum number of face-to-face contacts? And if there's no minimum requirements, I mean, we're saying we should have some minimum requirements. Then on 33 is actually looking at the actual number of face-to-face contacts participants actually have.
Right. So for 32. Right. I'm sorry. sorry.
So we can, the teams can adjust this for rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing projects. The tool itself is not doing that currently, and I don't want to change that at this point, since we've already shared the tool. But the teams can do that if they would like to do so, and that can be reflected in the final score. Let me share something about scoring. The score is primarily intended to give to do a couple of things. One is to give the projects a sense for how well they are implementing housing first approaches with their project, and then for us at the COC lead agency to also get a sense for that, and maybe in looking at the scores of the various projects, to look at some areas that perhaps we need more technical assistance on, perhaps more training from a TA consultant like Whitney Patterson, or maybe some other consultants that could help us. The scores on this instrument are not in any way going to be used to indicate that a project needs a specific performance improvement plan to improve its overall housing first implementation. It's not going to be used to rank projects in the 2024 COC competition. That was a decision of the performance management committee, largely because we realized that everybody, including our staff, we don't consider ourselves professional evaluators of housing first implementations, right? So it's a guide. It's not the be all and end all about housing first implementations. Perhaps if we had Dr. Sabaris himself involved with actually evaluating our projects, we might want to use it, in a more robust way. But it is so the specific percentage score will be the score that is used to kind of compare how projects are doing with one another, as well as within their own organization. Is that helpful?
Lloyd, can we go back to 32 and 33 again? So this was a good thing for Jeff to bring up. I have a question about the two questions and how they work together. So the first asks, is there a policy and rewards with points if there is a policy?
Correct.
The second rewards with the actual number of visits. Maybe there's no change necessary at this point because it's already been sent out, but it feels a little weird. Because if there is a policy, but they're not having the visits, they still get points for having the policy, even though they're not doing the visits, or some version of that.
Yeah, so they get points on 32 if they have policy. Number 33 gives points if they are, if the actual number is meeting the policy or exceeding the policy. So for example, on question 33, if the actual number of visits or face-to-face contacts is 2 to 3, they get 2 points if the policy is 2 to 3. They get 4 points if the policy is like 1 visit, but they're actually doing 2 to 3 visits. You see that? So it says 4 points if the policy is less than 2 to 3 visits. So similarly, if the policy is that they are, if the policy says, 2 to 3 visits, but they're actually doing 4 to 5 visits, they would get 6 points rather than just 3 points for meeting. So we're trying to, in 33, if they're exceeding the policy prescription, we give them essentially 3 extra points, or kind of bonus points for exceeding the policy's standard.
This is something that we may, yeah, this is something that we may have to clarify again, because I actually had not caught that, but you could essentially get if the policy is 2 to 3 visits, sorry, if the policy is less than 2 to 3 visits. Okay, I'll have to go back and
yeah,
that out.
Yeah, and I can perhaps highlight that when I send these documents out to the evaluation teams.
Yep.
We can talk about that further.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? It's 11:29, so we're pretty close to ending our time together. We can take another minute or two since we started a minute or two late. I'm going to stop sharing. Come back. Alrighty. So again, the goal would be to do site visits in February and March, and to wrap up this Housing First evaluation process by the end of March 2024. We'll be sending out communications later this week or into next week with follow-up activities to get the ball rolling with contact information for the various teams and the team leads. I've got a couple of team leads that I still haven't confirmed who they are. I've got, I think, 4 of 6 have confirmed, but we still have some work to do on that. Anything else for the good of the order this morning? Thanks for the rest of my team for participating. Thank you, Danielle. Hope that was helpful for you as well, and we'll make a recording of the today's training available to all of the evaluators as well in the coming days. With that, we will stop recording and end our session, and wish you all a great day. Thanks so much for participating.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.